For 10 long years, Osama bin Laden was a ghost. No signal, no photo, no trace. The CIA searched everywhere, mountains, deserts, crowded cities, and found nothing. A decade slipped away. The world began to whisper. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he was already dead. Then, one small clue changed everything. A phone call. Ordinary, unremarkable. But it led to something extraordinary. A quiet neighborhood in Pakistan. A strange house, surrounded by high walls. No internet, no phone lines. And just next door, Pakistan's main military academy. For years, the world's most wanted man had been hiding there, in plain sight. This isn't just the story of how he was found. It's the story of how instinct outsmarted intelligence, how patience triumphed where power could not, and how one thread, pulled carefully enough, can unravel the world's greatest mystery. At the dawn of the 21st century, an ordinary Tuesday morning turned the world on its head. September 11th, 2001, a day of coordinated terror that shook the global order and changed the course of history forever. Within hours, investigators uncovered the name behind the chaos, Al-Qaeda. And its leader was one the world already knew, Osama bin Laden. Inside the White House, the Pentagon, and intelligence rooms across the globe, everything shifted. The mission was no longer about justice. It was about vengeance and prevention. The United States vowed not just to punish those responsible, but to dismantle every network that sheltered them. The question wasn't if they would go after bin Laden. It was how fast they could find him. 10 days later, President George W. Bush issued an ultimatum to the Taliban rulers of Afghanistan: hand over bin Laden or face war. The Taliban refused, claiming there was no proof and that surrendering a guest broke tribal honor. October 7th, 2001. The first U.S. bombs fell over Kabul. Within weeks, Taliban defenses crumbled. But the man they came for was nowhere to be found. For American forces, victory came quickly, too quickly, because somewhere in that chaos, their main target slipped away. Intelligence pointed east, toward the rugged mountains of Tora Bora. Special forces and Afghan militias closed in, guided by radio intercepts and whispers from the locals. Days of battle followed, brutal, cold, relentless. Then, the radio signals went silent. When troops finally entered the tunnels, they found weapons, documents, food, everything but the man they sought. Was he killed, wounded, or had he simply walked out under their noses? In the fog of war, Osama bin Laden vanished again, this time across the border into Pakistan's tribal belt. A maze of valleys where terrain, loyalties, and the absence of law made pursuit almost impossible. For Washington, it was a bitter truth. The world's most powerful military couldn't find a single man. So the hunt changed hands, from soldiers to spies. Intelligence agencies began chasing money trails, coded messages, and whispers in the dark. Every clue raised more questions than answers. Every lead, another dead end. Years passed, entire missions built on rumors. That led nowhere. But buried somewhere inside that endless noise, a faint signal waited. A name no one recognized. A man the world had never heard of. And through him, the path would finally lead to Osama bin Laden's door. After the fall of Tora Bora, the world's most wanted man seemed to vanish into thin air. Intelligence networks that once tracked his every move went silent. Radio intercepts, satellite scans, informant networks, all failed. It was as if a man had erased himself from existence. In the months that followed, American and Allied forces turned to what they could control, dismantling Al-Qaeda's infrastructure, training camps destroyed, safe houses raided, operatives captured. Yet none of them could answer the question that mattered most. Where was Osama bin Laden? Reports trickled in, each more uncertain than the last. Some said he'd died from illness in the mountains. Others whispered he'd fled to Iran or disappeared into Pakistan's tribal belt. Every story carried a sliver of truth, but no proof. The trail had turned to myth. Inside the CIA, frustration grew. Billions of dollars spent, hundreds of agents deployed. And still, the man behind the deadliest attack on American soil remained free. Yet amid the disappointment, a new idea began to take shape. If technology couldn't find him, perhaps human behavior could. Bin Laden had always trusted one thing above all else: his couriers, men who carried his messages by hand, avoiding phones, internet, and radio. They were his lifeline to the world. Find them, and you might find him. Throughout the mid-2000s, agents combed through interrogation files, prisoner testimonies, and decades of surveillance. One name kept reappearing: Ibrahim al-Kuwaiti, a loyal al-Qaeda member, quiet, careful, said to have served directly under bin Laden himself. For years, it led nowhere, until one small fragment of intelligence suggested Ibrahim was still active, somewhere inside Pakistan. Nearly a decade had passed since Tora Bora. The search had shifted from mountains to cities, where shadows blended more easily with crowds. Pakistani intelligence worked with the CIA, but the alliance was fragile, built on caution and mistrust. Too many secrets, too many leaks. So much of the work continued in silence. Phone records, courier routes, property transactions. Every anomaly was examined. Families living under false names, compounds with high walls and no visitors. Then, in 2010, nearly 9 years after the trail had gone cold, a single mistake changed everything. Ibrahim al-Kuwaiti, cautious for nearly a decade, used his personal phone in a public area of Peshawar. That one call was all it took. Within minutes, his signal was traced, tracked, followed. But instead of arresting him, the CIA waited. They watched. Over the next few weeks, agents shadowed his movements. He traveled north, toward a quiet town called Abbottabad. There, he entered a large compound unlike any other in the neighborhood, walled off from the street, no internet, no phone lines, residents who kept to themselves. From above, analysts studied every inch, tall walls crowned with barbed wire, narrow entrances, no clear view from the outside. And yet, something about the place felt intentional. The residents burned their trash instead of leaving it out. Children almost never played outdoors. And one man, tall, reclusive, was sometimes seen pacing the upper balcony. The question came quickly: could this be him? Within weeks, the CIA compiled its findings into a report called Anatomy of a Lead. Inside Langley, analysts debated the odds. Some said 60%, others were certain, 90%. When the report reached Washington, President Obama and his advisors pored over every detail. It was the first credible lead in nearly 10 years, but it wasn't proof. Not yet. For months, surveillance continued. Agents monitored couriers, analyzed power usage, watched daily patterns from the sky. Every small behavior was logged: mealtimes, lights, movements, visitors. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. This wasn't a safe house. It was a fortress, built for one man, who could never afford to be seen. The CIA faced an impossible choice: move too soon, risk failure, wait too long, and the ghost might disappear again. After nearly a decade of silence, the world was finally closing in on a shadow, and for the first time in years, the hunters began to believe that the chase might soon be over. Months of quiet surveillance hardened into a pattern too specific to ignore. From thousands of miles away, analysts in Virginia watched a house in northern Pakistan. Walls unchanged, windows shuttered, an almost surgical silence. By early 2011, They had logged every light switch, every footstep, every delivery. The question was no longer whether something unusual was happening inside, but who lived there. The compound sat on the edge of Abbottabad, a calm city known for its military academy, its tree-lined streets. An unlikely place to hide the world's most wanted man, surrounded by officers' homes and army checkpoints. Exactly why it worked. Inside, agents noted 3 families. 2 brothers acted as caretakers. Their wives and children filled the lower floors. On the top level, a man who never stepped outside, never used a phone, set the household's rhythm. Children were homeschooled. Waste was burned, not collected. Small, ordinary acts that suddenly felt deliberate. Each detail tightened the suspicion. Could this be Osama Bin Laden? Washington needed certainty. Director Leon Panetta briefed President Obama. They could not risk involving Pakistani authorities. A leak would be fatal to the operation. Every step had to remain secret. Surveillance deepened. A small team rented a house less than a mile away. Hidden cameras and directional microphones gathered data around the clock. Infrared imagery measured body heat inside the walls. Night vision footage caught a tall figure, briefly, on an upper balcony at dusk. Measurements suggested a height near 6'4", the same as Bin Laden. Still, probability is not proof. Some urged caution. Others warned delay could mean another decade of searching. In December 2010, analysts proposed an audacious plan: verify identities through DNA. A local doctor, working under the cover of a vaccination campaign, would collect samples from the children, compare them to genetic profiles of known Bin Laden relatives. The plan reached the gate and failed. The residents refused the vaccine. The doctor's role surfaced, the effort collapsed, and political fallout followed. Failure did not stop the evidence from growing. Intercepted messages showed couriers to and from Abbottabad vanishing from networks for days, then reappearing in distant provinces with handwritten letters. A method of communication that left no electronic trace, the exact system Bin Laden had favored. By March 2011, the picture was nearly whole. Analysts rebuilt the compound in virtual models, every entrance, stairway, rooftop mapped. Specialists produced a sensitive site exploitation manual, a precise blueprint of occupants, the likely location of the target's quarters, the paths an assault team would take. Inside the White House, debate tightened to a razor. If the man inside was not Bin Laden, a cross-border strike would ignite a diplomatic crisis. If it was him, hesitation could lose the chance forever. President Obama ordered final assessments. Estimates ranged 60%, 90%, but consensus leaned toward action. After nearly 10 years of searching, the United States believed it had found its target. The mission now had a new shape, no longer a hunt, a plan. For months, the hunt had shifted, from finding proof to making a single, terrible choice. Washington faced 3 options: bomb the compound from the air, launch a drone strike, or send soldiers on the ground. Each choice carried consequences: tactical, political, moral. Could they remove the threat without destroying the evidence? An aerial bombardment would erase the house from the map. No boots on the ground, fewer American lives at risk. But civilians could die, and vital proof could be lost forever. A drone strike promised precision. Still, in the chaos, the man inside might slip away. Calling in Pakistani forces could soften the diplomatic blow, and yet risked a leak that would blow the whole mission. This was more than a military decision. It was a choice about sovereignty, trust, accountability. Who, if anyone, could they trust with this? After long briefings, planners proposed a different course: a covert ground raid, small, surgical, fast. Get in, confirm identity, finish the mission, get out. Secrecy would be absolute. Execution had to be flawless. The risk was grave, and the volunteers knew it. The operation had a name: Neptune's spear. Once approved, preparation moved with a speed that belied years of patient intelligence. The best of the best were chosen: a Red Squadron from SEAL Team 6, aviators from the 160 Special Operations Aviation Regiment, support teams for every contingency. They trained without pause. In a secure facility, they built a full-scale mock-up of the Abbottabad compound. Every wall, every stair, every doorway, rehearsed until the moves became muscle memory. A Belgian Malinois named Cairo learned to clear rooms. A Pashto-speaking translator embedded with the team. Lawyers rehearsed capture rules. Media officers drafted statements for every outcome. If anything went wrong, would they know how to handle it? Flight routes were planned to skirt Pakistani radar. Alternate exits were drawn. A Sentinel drone would watch from above. Chinook transport stood ready in the mountains. Everything had a backup. Everything had a contingency. Still, only a handful of people knew the details. Compartmentalization was total. Final authorization rested with the president. Briefings unfolded in the situation room. Plans became diagrams, timelines, probability estimates. Weather became decisive. A launch window opened in April 2011, then closed because conditions turned bad. The mission waited. The elements had a vote of their own. Would the weather betray them after 10 years of waiting? In the final days, teams staged in the region moved to bases in Afghanistan for last rehearsals. Operators received their briefs one last time. Assignments distributed. Routes memorized. Exfiltration points confirmed. Back in Washington, the president and his national security advisors watched the clock. Every cabinet member, every field commander understood the stakes. This was where intelligence certainty, operational capability, and political judgment collided. When the green light finally came, it was the sum of 10 years. Signals and silences, surveillance and human leads. The plan was set. The question that remained was simple and brutal. Would a handful of men on a single dark night finally close the book on a decade-long hunt? Late on the night of May 1st, 2011, the operation moved from planning to reality. In the quiet darkness above Afghanistan, a small formation of helicopters lifted off and turned east toward the border. Their pilots flew without running lights, hugging the valleys so tightly that radar would see only the shapes of the hills beneath them. Inside those cabins sat men who had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. Each one knew success or failure would unfold in less than an hour. They weren't just flying toward a target. They were flying into history. Crossing into Pakistani airspace, they glided silently toward a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Abbottabad. In Washington, a secure feed transmitted sparse updates to the White House Situation Room. Screens glowed with infrared images and coded reports. The room stayed silent, except for the calm voices of commanders confirming each stage of the flight. Every few seconds, someone's life could change, and no one dared speak above a whisper. As the helicopters reached the compound, an unexpected downdraft forced one aircraft into a hard landing inside the walls. Training took over. The team moved without hesitation, adapting in seconds. Within minutes, they pushed through the building, clearing rooms, identifying occupants, securing each floor. In a command center hundreds of miles away, analysts tracked bursts of encrypted radio signals marking progress. Then, the message everyone had been waiting for came through. Geronimo, EKIA. 3 words. Enemy killed in action. They closed a chapter written over 10 years of war, intelligence, and loss. The silence that followed was heavier than any cheer. The SEALs moved quickly, collecting computers, hard drives, documents. Each item could hold secrets about Al-Qaeda's structure, its funding, its future. Before leaving, they destroyed sensitive equipment, disabling the downed helicopter to keep technology from falling into the wrong hands. 40 minutes after touching down, the remaining aircraft rose into the night sky and turned west toward Afghanistan. At the forward base, biometric samples were taken and compared with known genetic records of Bin Laden's family. The match was immediate and final. Confirmation raced up the chain of command. In the early hours of May 2nd, President Obama looked around the Situation Room and spoke the words his team had waited to hear. "We got him." A few hours later, the world heard them too. Crowds gathered outside the White House, waving flags, chanting, celebrating. Others stood in quiet disbelief, absorbing the weight of a decade's pursuit. For the intelligence and military personnel, it marked closure, an end to years of silence, frustration, unseen work. But for policymakers, it opened a harder question. What happens after justice is done in secret? Relations with Pakistan were strained. Officials there had been kept in the dark. Across the world, analysts combed through the recovered files, searching for clues to al-Qaeda's networks and the next phase of extremism. The mission that began as the hunt for one man had become something greater, a mirror reflecting the reach and the limits of modern power. In the days that followed, diplomacy moved as carefully as the operation itself. Channels opened between Washington and Islamabad, each side measuring its words. In Pakistan, officials demanded to know how such an operation could unfold, undetected. Across the world, debates ignited about sovereignty, law, and the boundaries of power in a world without boundaries. Analysts turned their focus to the trove of recovered data, letters, drives, fragments of communication. Inside them lay the inner workings of al-Qaeda, its networks, its doubts, its fading command. The decade-long pursuit that began in the smoke of tragedy ended not with triumphal noise, but with quiet understanding, an acknowledgement that the world had changed during the hunt and would continue to change after it. 10 years of intelligence, coordination, and persistence had closed one chapter of modern history. Yet that night's story revealed a deeper truth. The fight against extremism would never hinge on a single mission. It would depend on cooperation, on vigilance, on understanding. The helicopters vanished once more into the dark, leaving behind a shattered compound, a place that would become a symbol, not only of justice served, but of the patience, the technology, and the human will it took to find one man in a world transformed by conflict and information. And so, after a decade of silence, the hunt was finally over.